Good afternoon. It's good attendance with the graveyard shift. I'm impressed. As I said, as I was introduced, I'm Bryce Crocker. I joined Jervois in September last year. Brought in a couple of other executives who I've been working with previously, Brian Kennedy, Michael Rodriguez. And I guess we're, like many of you I'm sure, we're also bulls on the cobalt nickel thematic. The thematic is fantastic, but I guess us as investors, we're trying to find the right way to play it. Our view is there's easier ways to play it than undertake multi-billion dollar projects with long lead times, high technical risk. We have the background through our time at Xstrata, Glencore, Murrin, etc. And because of that background, we're very wary of the risks associated with some of the alternative projects around. So the other aspect before I get started I'd like to highlight is I guess just with our trading background in the nickel cobalt side, offtake is bad. So, and what I mean by that is I guess there's really three rationales as to why you would sign an offtake now at the cusp of what we believe is going to be a massive demand for nickel and cobalt in the future. A, you don't believe the thematic. B, you have to provide someone physical product to get their money, i.e. you have to give the Chinese the product to get the Chinese funding. Or C, you don't have the organisational capacity and executional ability as a company to build the project. So we're focused on what we can actually execute. We want to get into production. We want to differentiate ourselves in the market. And the reason that we're getting inundated, and the same as everyone else is getting inundated by OEMs, raw material, battery makers, cathode manufacturers, traders, is not because people think there's going to be a surplus of units in 5 years' time. So our strategy, execute projects, open register, open offtake. In terms of Jervois itself, market cap around 90 mil. Today we've got 16 mil in the bank, Aussie. We'll end the year with 22 million Australian through a function of receivables and some non-core royalty sales that we've executed with Cobalt 27 recently. So I guess we're setting ourselves up. The core project is Nico Young. So I was asked to take a look at Nico Young. I flicked it across to some of the guys that we had been working, as I said, with private equity previously, and said, can you get it to heap leach? Obviously, we've got to work through the tests, but what we did at an indicative basis, on a desktop basis, guess what we've essentially got is we've got the group from Murrin. So Murrin operated a heap leach for 3 years, got their operating costs under $3 a pound, fully integrated, was a commercial success, and so we've essentially plucked Michael Rodriguez, was operations director at Murrin, and again, the core of the executive team that's behind us is also all ex-Glencore, Xstrata. Logistics matters. I guess I've looked at most nickel cobalt laterite projects in the world, and most of the time you're kind of traipsing through jungle, scaring away primates in order to kind of see the resource. So we had the board meeting at Young this week, and as far as locations in the mining industry go, it honestly doesn't get much better. We're 25 kilometres away from Young, so far enough away so that dust and noise aren't an issue, but close enough so that the workforce can drive in, drive out, which is an important advantage when you look at, I guess, the comparator operation, and obviously the benchmark that we kind of use is Murrin. I mean, Murrin's FIFO, Murrin's 80k from rail, we're 12. This isn't hypothetical rail that's reliant on funding. It's operating today. They take 135,000 tonne of grain out in a 6-week harvesting window now. We've got a magnesite mine on the northern part of the boundary, about 3 kilometres from where we think the mine will commence on RIU. That's important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's a small dinky die operation, probably 350,000 tonnes a year, but what we're looking at is 1 million tonne per year at a very low strip. So it's also, for those of you that are involved in bigger mining operations, these kind of things are small sand pits, but it demonstrates that the locals understand what a mine looks like. And it's also important because we've got a local source, a reductant. So what we're looking to do is go to produce a mixed hydroxide. We're not going to go to final product. Again, I believe it's strategically a mistake. The preferred product of choice is moving back away from sulfates, back to hydroxides, provided you can get them clean, low Mg, low Mn, low zinc. And in terms of the capital risk trade-off and payabilities, that's the way that the market's moving. We've got the Cooper gas pipeline nearby, although for our flow sheet we don't require that. Sealed roads. It's a great location to be looking at a mining operation. 2 ore bodies, Ardnaree and Thadungra. Ardnaree, shallower. I mean, they're both shallow, obviously, both Ardenary probably starts at around 10 metres, 80% of the mineralisation above 50, Thadungra thicker but a little deeper, 20-30 metre pre-strip, but again you've still got say 40% of the mineralisation above 50 metres. The importance is, nickel cobalt laterite, low value product, you can't dig for it, you need low strip. In terms of the geology, basic lateritic structures, as I said, kind of flat. I guess when we came in, I guess my background was M&A, so a lot of the time when you come in and you do due diligence on juniors, the geological model falls apart once you start applying Xstrata, BHP, RIU standards to QA/QC and other things. So I pulled a guy that I'd used on the laterite side, got him to come in under the Snowden banner and said, look, audit everything. Go back through all the historical drilling, go through all the core, go through all the processes. Give us something that kind of holds together with the same standards that we would have expected. So we released the updated resource to market in November as a result of Snowden's work. 170 million tonne, 0.6, 0.06. At a 1% cut-off, 40 million tonne, 0.8, 0.09. I guess the cut-off is important because if you're going to build a $2 or $3 billion HPAL plant, then you need a 300 million tonne resource, so that large, massive scale resource is important. We've still got the resource, but what we're looking to do is get it, as I said, get into production faster. 1 million tonne per annum is what the PFS is based on. So we can afford, can we raise the cut-off? Can we start to isolate higher grade, particularly shallower, higher cobalt mineralisation, look to get into production quickly and take advantage of, obviously, cobalt prices where they are today. We then asked the team to go back and rebuild the model based on a cobalt cut-off. So essentially, if you look on a revenue basis, our mine's essentially 1-to-1 at, say, $6 nickel, 30 cobalt, which is what we're using for the PFS. So when you go back and look at it on a cobalt basis, obviously the cobalt doesn't follow the nickel with lithologies. What's unique about Nico Young and why we believe it has a hype, it will essentially heap leach, is low Fe, low Mg, high silica. It's quite different to a lot of the other laterites. So we believe it has the characteristics that will allow agglomeration, allow the heap to hold its structure, and allow permeability of solutions. Looking at it on the cobalt cutoff, again, you've got at a 0.05, 100 million tonne, at 0.6, 0.08, but again, raising the cutoff, 0.08, 30, 35 million tonne, 0.66, 0.12. So we're starting to get up to the cobalt grades, which do look interesting. I guess what we saw in the opportunity, you've got cobalt equivalent grade here on the y-axis, contained cobalt equivalent on the x, size of the bubbles, market cap. So we're this little orange bubble amongst the bigger yellow bubbles. We've solved that problem marginally. We have improved the relative value differential, but when we looked at it, it was just fundamentally mispriced. It was an asset that was forgotten. Jervois has been around for a long time, 50 years on the ASX. So it has a long history, and this was just an asset that kind of people had forgotten about. When I was asked to take a look at it, I also knew a project that I guess those of us in the industry didn't regard as a particularly historically a high-grade project, what they call now Sunrise, and I'd looked at the market valuation that Friedland had obviously been able to create, and so we just decided this is fundamentally mispriced, hence why we came back into the public markets via Jervois. In terms of our direct comparables, I guess there's a lot of noise in the market, and I think something that investors struggle with, and this is why it's kind of which projects are real and which aren't. So I guess I've highlighted here mineral resource, contained cobalt equivalent grade, market cap. And if you look across the board, broadly similar with the exception of the market cap. And I guess there's things like cobalt nickel ratio, like if you've got a high cobalt nickel ratio, if you've got a high ratio or a low ratio, i.e. lots of cobalt, because you have high cobalt levels, then that's great. If your ratio is where it is because you've got low nickel, that's less good. So people kind of forget, because obviously, again, our background's Murrin. When Murrin started, 300 million tonne resource, running 1.3% nickel, probably 0.12 cobalt. So I guess that's just a sobering thought, because those of us who are in the room who are Australian, no one gets excited about Murrin. It's probably clearing $1 million a day today, but it's got a long history. And I was at site in late 2017, and that's the first time where it's been operating at capacity. And they're good operators. That's how long it took them to hit production rates. So again, it just reinforces, we're massive believers in the thematic. I've never been involved in a commodity where the structural dynamics are such, you can't structure a scenario that leads to oversupply, It's just a question as to how big the deficits are going to be and what's going to happen to price and demand when those deficits arise. But we as investors, we've got to find a way to get into production. Can't kick cans down roads. And so we're looking at, again, we've always got the option, or the optionality, if you like, of a HPAL. We've actually got the organisational capacity to do it. As I said, we've been at Goro, Murrin, Ambatobi, Gorders, and the guys have been at Coral Bay, Moa Bay. So between our executive team, we've spent probably 100 years at HPALs. But equally, we just think because we've got that experience, you just have to find a way to make money out of this cycle without getting involved in those sort of projects. Hence heap leaching. Doesn't work for all nickel cobalt laterites, otherwise no one would be building autoclaves. So it takes a specific type of mineralogy, which we're working through now. As I said, we've extracted, I guess, the intellectual capital of heap leaching in Australia via Murrin. And we're also working with some of the best advisors that we believe exist, which is essentially out of the US. Because of the copper heap leaching business, the best expertise in the world does reside in largely in the southern US. So in terms of drill programs, when we came in, we did a drill program, infill on Ardnaree, get up a shallow indicated resource that gives us some confidence in terms of early mine planning. Our board approved earlier this week a similar program, slightly larger in scope on Thadungra. Our expectation, the mine plan that came back from Snowden does indicate that Ardnaree will be first. But again, it's about making sure that we don't construct the mine on the wrong ore body. We want to get through the drilling on Thadungra. That'll feed into the DFS later in the year. And I guess the PFS is something that, again, the quality of the team that we've pulled together isn't something that would typically be associated in a company of our size. I haven't got names up against the individuals, just organisations, but if we do move through the names, it's essentially all the usual suspects, just Glencore and Xstrata execs working under different guises. Preliminary site layouts we have here, both for Ardnaree, Thadungra, early days. In terms of the PFS itself, PFS is September this year, we'll deliver the PFS. As I said, it's based on a 1 million tonne per annum scenario. We purchased this equipment. So we purchased an agglomerator, stacker, conveyor. What that enables us to do, there's a couple of benefits. Firstly, it's a lot cheaper than ordering it new. And secondly, and I believe more importantly, I guess we're trying to get to the market as quickly as we possibly can, but equally conscious there's key technical risks we have to cover off. So there's a large number of items that we're spending significant funding on. The environmental side, that's just, as everyone in this room knows, it's expensive these days. You've got to do it right. So significant amounts of funding on the PFS going through there. The other is just in relation to being able to accelerate and compress the project. What can we parallel stream in terms of an ability to bring forwards production? And with the agglomerator, conveyor and stacker, this just means that we can we've picked it up from Mount Cuthbert in Queensland, prepare it working with our advisors for the demob during the dry season. And this provides us an opportunity to really push forwards and accelerate production as quickly as we can. And I guess this is, if we look across on the east coast of the alternatives available for nickel cobalt, some of the other projects are on paper more advanced. They're in DFS, but I'm going to beat them to production. I mean, this is a different level of executional complexity. Once we get the approvals and once we're ready to construct, 5 months later, I've got pads built and I'm irrigating. Obviously, you've got a lead time after that in terms of you can take the PLS solution off the pads and precipitate out. But I mean, I've looked at a lot of the HPALs. You've got a year for a multi-billion-dollar project. You've got a year financing. You've got 3 years construction, 3 years commissioning. All of us are hopefully kind of on the south of France by the time any of these other projects hit nameplate. Moving forwards, we've been rationalising non-core assets. Elementos, tin shareholding. Khartoum, we're running a process for some greenfields tin up in Queensland. We sold some royalties recently to Cobalt 27, 4.5 US over the Flemington project and Ningen. We've got a number of other royalties which we're looking to still divest for the right time and the right price. But as I said, given we're going to end the year with 22 Aussie in cash, we've under no degree of urgency there. We'll exit those at the appropriate time for the shareholders. And so in conclusion, as I'm kind of focused on the balance sheet, The project's moving ahead strongly. When I started at this, I guess, October last year, I wouldn't have expected that we would have spent 5 Aussie mil on drilling, PFS, etc. And that's not a consequence of scope or budget overruns. It's just because we're doing much more, much faster than what we think, because everything we see so far has been as good or better than what our due diligence last year in September has shown. And we're also looking at parallel opportunities. And I guess the thesis here is that Nico Young's, we might be 1,000 tonne, basis the initial production rates, we're 1,000 tonne of cobalt. By the time we come on, although it's going to be quicker than others, 1,000 tonne in a 130,000 tonne market. So even if my production is uncommitted, I'm still not a player, in the same way as we were obviously at Glencore, where we essentially had a large, very significant portion of the market. So I think there is space for teams that want to get in, construct, commission, operate, and have, and I guess I've worked with a lot of investors who love the thematic, but there's just not many ways to play it in terms of equity alternatives. And so I guess part of our strategy is getting multiple operations, multiple sites in 3 to 5 years, and giving investors a viable investment, a viable and attractive liquid alternative that doesn't involve taking on significant technical risk associated with multi-billion-dollar projects. Thank you.